I want to thank Matthew for the invitation. I'm a great fan of the RSA and a long-time fellow. And I'm delighted to know that my talk here has been the most popular download. No, I was saying the TED video has been downloaded 4 million times. My son showed me a video recently on YouTube of two kittens who seem to be having a conversation. It's 90 seconds long, and that's been downloaded 17 million times. So I'm not getting carried away with myself, really. If only I had looked cute for 90 seconds, my fame would be even greater. I just want to say a few words about this book, because the real value of today is that we're a small enough group to have a conversation, and I would really value that. I was asked recently how long it took to write this book. And there are two answers to that. One of them is 8 months, 6 to 8 months. And the other is 35 years. Because this book is about something I feel passionately about and have done most of my professional life. Actually, longer than that even, most of my unprofessional life. And the core idea really is that, certainly in my experience, most adults have no idea of their true talents, no idea of what they're really capable of achieving. Most adults, in my experience, kind of bump along the bottom. You know, they do something they feel perhaps more or less competent in, things they feel they need to do, but don't do it with any great passion or commitment or any great sense of fulfillment. I don't say this is true of you, and I can't prove the statistics of this. I'm just saying it's been my experience. I meet people time and again. And yet I also meet people who absolutely love what they do and couldn't really imagine doing anything else. That when they discovered this thing, for them it was a turning point, and this is what their life has become. So I've long been interested in what the difference is and what makes the difference. And the book is therefore based on a whole series of interviews with people about how they got to be, so to speak, in their element. I heard myself saying this a lot, you know, that people do their best when they do something they love, when they're in their element. And I thought, well, what is it quite to be in your element? And I think it's two things. One of them is that if you're in your element, you're doing something for which you have a natural capacity, a natural feel. And it's different for all sorts of people. It's different for all of us, really. One of the people in the book is a guy called Terence Tao. I didn't have the pleasure of meeting him, but his story is quite well known, and we included it. Terence Tao, have you heard of Terence Tao, any of you? He's a professor of mathematics in UCLA. At the age of 2, he taught himself to read from Sesame Street. So a rather quirky accent in the case of Terence, and rather too feathered for most people's taste, really. And then at the age of 3, he was completing double-digit equations. I don't know what they are, by the way, but he was doing it at 3. At the age of 8, he took a college entrance exam in mathematics and got 97%. At the age of 20, he got his PhD in maths, and at the age of 30, he got the Field Medal, which is equivalent to the Nobel Prize for Mathematics, and the MacArthur Genius Award. It's reasonable to say that Terence gets maths. You know? Terence got the hang of maths, frankly, in a way that most of us have not. I realized recently, I was born in 1950. That's not what I realized recently. I knew that. I have known that for some time now, in fact, since 1950. So I'm a kind of boomer, kind of. And I realized recently that I was given a guitar as a teenager around the same time that Eric Clapton got his first guitar. It worked out for Eric, you know, in a way it is yet to work out for me. So part of this is having a natural aptitude, kind of knowing what this thing is, and taking to it. But being good at something, being naturally good at something, is not enough to be in your element, as I see it. To be in your element, you also have to love it. I know lots of people who are doing things they're good at that they don't greatly care for. They do it because they're good at it. I wrote a book in the 80s, and the editor who worked on the book is a wonderful woman. She used to be a concert pianist. And I was rather surprised by this when she told me, and I said, what happened? And she said she was giving a concert at the Purcell Room on the South Bank one evening. And at the end of it, the conductor took her for dinner and said, "You were great this evening." She said, "Thank you." He said, "But you didn't enjoy it, did you?" And she said, "How do you mean?" He said, "Well, you didn't enjoy it." She said, "What?" He said, "Well, playing. You didn't seem to enjoy it." She said, "Well, no, not really." And he said, "Well, do you enjoy playing?" She said, "No, not really." He said, "Well, why do you do it?" She said, "Well, because I'm good at it, I suppose." And he said, being good at something is not a good enough reason to do it. And she realized that what had happened was she'd spent her entire life meeting other people's expectations. That she'd shown a precocious talent as a pianist. She went to a specialist music school. Then she went to the Royal College of Music, and then she did a Doctor of Music degree, and then she did and then she progressed to the concert platform. And she said nobody had ever really stopped to ask her, and she'd never stopped to ask herself why she was doing it, except that she was good at it. She just could. And said, and I realized when he put this to me that I'd never liked it. And at the end of that season, she said, I finished the season, finished my commitments, but I closed the lid of the piano, and I've never opened it since. She said, because I realized, when I stopped to think about it, that the thing I had always loved was books. Always. I loved writers, I loved being around writers, I loved the literary world, I loved reading, I loved writing when I could. So she said, I determined that I'd find a role in the literary world so I could be among the people I wanted to be with and do the thing I loved to do. And she said, I've never been happier. And I say this for several reasons. One is that I say it's not enough to be good at something, and this isn't just about the art. Sometimes the arts trap people as much as anything else trap people. It's about finding the thing that resonates with you most fully. I've been asked a couple of things about the book. They say, is the book about creativity? This book is not really about creativity, in my opinion. This is a book about diversity. It's about the extraordinary multiplicity of human talent, most of which, in my experience, is lost. And there are reasons why it's lost. So part of the book is describing what I mean by the element, and it's that point at which natural talent meets a passion. I think when you find yourself in love with something you're good at, you never really work again, I remember years ago, my brother used to be in a band. I'm from Liverpool. He was in a rock band. And he had a fantastic keyboard player, Charles. And I went out with him one night to this gig, see? Cutting edge, I want you to know that. A gig. And we're hanging after the gig, and chilling, so to speak. And I said, you were fantastic there tonight, Charles. He said, thank you. I said, but you didn't enjoy it. No, I didn't say that. no, I said, no, you were fantastic there tonight, weren't you? He said, yes, I was. And I said, it was a casual remark. I said, I would love to do that. He said, do what? I said, play the keyboards. I'd love to be able to do that. We're just sitting there with a drink. He said, no, you wouldn't. I was a bit taken aback, because I felt myself an authority on my own opinions, so I said, but I would. He said, no, you wouldn't. And we went on in this way for some time, And he said, no. He said, if you would love to do this, you'd be doing it. He said, to do what I do, I practice 6 to 8 hours every day, and I play every night. And I do that because I love it. I couldn't do it if I didn't. He said, I think what you mean is you like the idea of it. So I was a bit startled, really, because it was a casual social comment, frankly. I didn't mean to be sort of cauterized in this way socially, but he made a good point, that it's that point at which passion meets a natural facility. Now, the reason I wanted to explore all of this is because, as I say, my experience is that most people don't have the experience of finding this configuration in their lives. I don't say it's true of you, but it's true of a lot of people. And yet some do. And they're in all sorts of different fields. Now, I've had a lifelong commitment, as I guess some of you know, to education. And I think education is partly responsible for diverting people from their talents. I don't mean individual teachers or particular schools. It's not a problem of teachers or particular schools. It's a system problem. It's to do with the ideology of education in which people are working. the things they take for granted as being true. In many cases, in my opinion, things that are not true. One of them, for example, is this extraordinary distinction which still plagues us, which, by the way, the RSA, I think, has always pioneered against. This awful distinction people make between academic and vocational education. I really think it's a dreadful mistake to both make the distinction and then to privilege academic work above what's called vocational work. You know, as if doing things with your hands isn't really to be discussed in polite public. That, you know, real education is about a certain type of abstract conceptual knowledge, and that they're different in some way. I'll just give you an example of why I think it's so awkward and pernicious. I was in San Francisco a week ago signing a book. Actually, I was signing a number of books, you'd be interested. I mean, I didn't fly to San Francisco to sign this one book. You know, there were many books. But there was a line of people whose books I was signing. And what I find is people tell you their stories, and you get kind of adept at having a one-minute conversation with somebody for as long as it takes to sign their name, really. So you're not holding people up. But this guy stopped in front of me, and I'd been kind of having a little rant about academic and vocational education. And he said I was really, he bought the book, and so I was prepared to speak to him. And he said, I loved what you were saying, by the way. I said, well, what do you do? He said, I'm a fireman in Danville with the fire service. I said, oh, fantastic. How long have you been a fireman? He said, well, my working life. I said, and when did you know you wanted to be a fireman? He said, I always wanted to be a fireman. I said, I know kids say they want to be a fireman. I always wanted to be a fireman, all the way through school. He said, but nobody ever encouraged me. He said, I was in a school where the whole thing was to get to college and do a degree. He said, I never wanted to do that. I wanted to be a fireman. And he said, I was always made to feel bad about it. He said, in fact, I had one teacher who made a fool of me one day in the class when we were talking about careers. And he said what I want to do. And he told me I was stupid and that I would never amount to anything. He said, and a few months ago, I saved his life. You know, I pulled him out of a crash, gave him CPR, and he said, and I saved his wife's life as well. He said, I think he thinks better of me now. But you know what I mean? This insistence on a certain type of talent automatically pushes other sorts of talents further away, you know, from the center of attention in education. Now, the book, from one point of view, is personal in the sense it has lots of personal stories. But it's more than that. It's not really just a book of reminiscences by people who are doing things they like to do. There are three arguments that run through it, which I think are also central to what happens at the RSA. And they're these. The first is that what I'm trying to articulate in the book, I believe, is essential to human fulfillment. That finding a purpose in the work we do or the way that we spend our time, which resonates deeply with who we think we are, is an essential part of knowing who we are. That in a way, if you don't know what you can do, you don't really know what you might be. So it's about that, and people are in the book from all kinds of different fields. One of the people in the book is a guy called Bart Conner. Have you ever heard of Bart Conner? Bart Conner is a fantastic guy. I met him in Oklahoma a few years ago. Bart found that when he was 6, he could walk on his hands as easily as he could walk on his feet. We don't know how he found this out. I think he just fell over, but he could do it. And he said it wasn't much use to anybody, you know, but it was a source of social celebration. And then he found he could walk up and down stairs on his hands as well. You know, again, not a great deal of use, you know, but socially, you know, engaging. He said, you know, whenever the party's at the house, you know, and the conversation lulled, you know, his dad would say, Bart, just do the hands thing there, would you, man? You just do the stairs. Anyway, when he was, I think, about 8, this is in Morton Grove, Illinois, his mother took him to the local gymnastics center downtown with the school gymnastics teacher because she thought this was interesting, that he could do this and seemed to enjoy it. So they took him to the big gymnastics center. And he said he walked into this gymnastics center, to this gymnasium, and he said, it took my breath away. You know, there were ropes, vaulting courses, wall bars, trampolines. He said, to me, it was a combination of Disneyland and Santa's Grotto. He said it was intoxicating. Now, you see, here again, I do not have this feeling when I walk into a gymnasium. You know, I do not find it intoxicating. I want to get intoxicated, you know, if I go into a gymnasium. But he found it intoxicating, and he started going regularly. 10 years later, he walked onto the mat at the Montreal Olympics, representing America in the male gymnastics squad. He became the most decorated male gymnast in American history. He now lives in Norman, Oklahoma. He's married to Nadia Comaneci. Do you recall the Perfect 10? They have this extraordinary gymnastics school, and he and Nadia are leading figures in the world's Special Olympics movement. So between them, they've helped to liberate, you know, the athletic capabilities of tens of thousands of people with disabilities. I think it's a fantastic story. But there are a couple of things I just want to say about it. You know, the first is that, you know, his mother could not have anticipated that that would be the trajectory that his life would follow. It wasn't like at the age of 8, she saw him doing this thing on the stairs, you know, and thought, well, he can do that. You know, there's this girl in Romania, you know, maybe. What she did was encourage his talent, and the talent created the opportunities to which he then responded. And this, to me, is fundamentally important because it illustrates something, I think, which is essential to our understanding of how education should work. That life, our own lives, are not linear. It's much more appropriate, I think, to think not of linear metaphors for human growth and development, but of organic metaphors. That our lives evolve around the responses we have to the opportunities that meet us, and we in turn reciprocate with them. So his life became transformed by the investment he made in his own passion for gymnastics. He could not have planned the trajectory. Now I say this because we still run our education systems as if life is linear. We run them as if it's mechanistic. This is one of the reasons so many things get phased out of education, because people say, well, you'll never get a job if you do that. You know, things are dropped off the end because they don't meet the linear assumption. I came across a policy paper a while ago when I went to Los Angeles, which seemed to me to really exemplify this. You know, we are obsessed with getting people to universities at the moment. It's like the whole job is to get to university. Why? I don't mean you shouldn't go, but I don't think everybody should go and have that type of education. People should go and do other things, or not go now, you know. Do something else for a bit till they understand it. But I came across this policy paper which said that it was entitled, "College Begins in Kindergarten." No, it doesn't. Do you know, it doesn't. I mean, if we had more time, we could go into this, but time is short, so it doesn't. Kindergarten begins in kindergarten. You know, there's the guy who runs the Ark in Dublin made a fantastic comment. I can't just remember his name now. He's a wonderful man. But he said a 3-year-old is not half a 6-year-old. A 6-year-old is not half a 12-year-old. You know, but you know, I'm sure it's true in London, it's true in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Parents are competing to get their children into particular kindergartens. Competing. You know, kids are being interviewed at 3 for kindergarten. You're presumably producing CVs, you know, sitting in front of unimpressed selection boards, flicking through this thing, you know. This is it, you know, you've been around for 36 months and this is it, you know, you've achieved nothing, you know, you've spent the first 6 months breastfeeding, from what I can tell. It's an outrage. You see, it's preposterous, isn't it? And yet the whole system of education is planned as if it's a linear process whose outcomes you can foretell. You simply cannot. And on this basis, many people along the way are being detached from their natural interests in the interests of this faulted model of progress. So, one, it's important for personal fulfillment. The second major argument here is that I think it's essential for the health of our communities. That if you have people aggregated in large numbers who feel disaffected, dislocated from a sense of purpose, with no social investment, either in themselves or the communities of which they're part, well, we know the price that we pay for this. I made an analogy, I think, the last time I was here at the RSA, because I believe it strongly, between the crisis in the world's natural resources, which I believe is real and severe, and the crisis which I think this book is about, which is the crisis in the world's human resources. And I think the origins are the same. They lie in industrialism and in a particular intellectual preoccupation. And the analogy is even stronger than that, because the current status quo serves the interests of massive commercial interests in just the same way as the oil-based economy met the needs of massive commercial interests. I know it's not so true in the UK, but in America there's an alleged outbreak of ADHD, attention deficit disorder. This is, I think, a false epidemic. I don't mean to say there's no such thing, but according to the figures in America, in the mid-80s, 500,000 kids were diagnosed with ADHD, and it's now nearly 8 million. Well, this is a bonanza for the drug companies and the pharmaceutical companies. Testing is a multi-billion-dollar industry, often conducted in the hands of people who know very little about education, just to keep the system running. So I think the analogy is exact. And I think I said last time, in America, for example, in California, I think the price we pay is enormous. Next year, 2010, in America, total spending on the state prison system will overtake spending on higher education. Does that make any kind of sense? I don't know what the figures are here, but it's a ludicrous conception of human capacity, isn't it? I just don't think there are that many bad people, I mean, there are bad people, but not so many. There are people in bad circumstances who make bad judgments, but not that many naturally bad people. I mean, there aren't that many psychopaths, I don't think, Actually, you don't need that many psychopaths, truthfully. I mean, one goes a long way, I find, don't you, really? If you meet 2 psychopaths in the same day, that's a bad day, really, isn't it? I'm saying, dear diary, what a day. So I think it's essential for the health of our communities. It, to me, speaks to a broader conception of human resources. And the final way in which I think the analogy holds is this, that human talent, human ability, like the world's natural resources, is often buried deep. It's not just lying around on the surface. You have to go looking for it. And that's true of many of the people in this book. Something happened which enabled them to develop this particular talent. They met somebody, or there was a confluence of circumstances, or there was a mentor, somebody who spotted something, or they came across it. It's not just obvious where your talent might be. And that's why I think so many people don't know what their talents are, because they've never actually come upon them yet. And the final point is, I think this is a hard-headed economic argument. That, as we look into the future and can't predict even 2 weeks out, what the economies may look like, what jobs people will do, how the economies may evolve, what sort of economic progress we'll make. Investing in the old model seems to me to be absolutely absurd. The old model is predicated on a particular view of intelligence and talent, and I think for the future we need to evolve systems of education and of organizational planning and of community development, which are based on a model of diversity rather than of conformity. And that's, in the end, what this book is about. It's to try and promote a broader view of the diversity of human talent in all of its many forms. So the first 2 bits of that, it's about ability and it's about aptitude. It's also about attitude. I have a chapter in the book called Do You Feel Lucky? Because a lot of the people in the book say that they owe their success to luck. But actually, luck is a bit of a get-out, I think. Random things happen to all of us. That's really not the point. It's not what happens to you, I think, that makes the difference in your life. It's what you make of what happens, how you meet these circumstances and what you do about it. And it's about opportunity. There aren't that many pearl divers in the Sahara, truthfully, and not much bronco riding in the Antarctic. It's about cultural circumstances. Things prevent this happening, quite severe things happening. I have a chapter called What Will They Think? One of the things, I think of these as circles of constraint. One of the things that stops us doing what we might want to do is our own self-censorship. A fear that we'll fall flat on our face, that, well, me, I'm not even entitled to it. A second, I think, is other people's attitudes, friends and family, often well-intentioned. I tell the story in the book of Paulo Coelho. I didn't meet him either, but that's 2 of the people I mentioned who I didn't actually get to meet for the book, but the rest I did. But Paulo Coelho, the writer of The Alchemist, one of the world's top-selling authors now, wanted to be a writer from when he was a kid. And his parents heavily disapproved of this, and when he got to be a teenager and persisted in this idea, and when he approached university age, he wouldn't give up on the idea. They actually had him committed to a mental institution where he had 3 series of electroconvulsive therapy to try and get this idea out of his head. Anyway, he didn't get out of his head, and he carried on to be Paulo Coelho, the person we know. Now, most of us don't have that. Most of us aren't actually plugged into the mains, to stop this happening. But there are all forms of tacit disapproval that prevent us moving forward. It can be the raised eyebrow of a friend, or a group culture. What, you, seriously? What, you would do that? Oh, well, okay. You know, it's that kind of... Or cultural constraints about the roles of women or other communities. So I'm not trying to say that this is easy, but I'm saying it's essential, and that there are things we can do, particularly in the systematic process that we put forward through education and organisation of communities, that can assist it. So the final thing I just want to say is, you know, I've had a lifetime of interest in education and human possibility. But in the end, what it seems to me essential to emphasize is that education is not a mechanistic process, and organizations are not mechanisms. You know, if you look at the management chart of most organizations, it looks like a wiring diagram. And it all kind of suggests that these are like mechanisms, and they're not. Human life and human communities are much more like organisms, in the sense that we flourish under certain conditions and we fade under certain conditions. And our success is always synergistic with our environment, as it is with a plant. You know, that a successful plant is successful throughout, not just in one part. And its success depends on the environment in which it lives and its enrichment of the environment. And I find this is true in the human field. I know schools across this country, organizations which are wonderfully healthy and vital, who enrich their environment and the people in it. The problem happens when we start to depersonalize education. And it continues to impress and depress me when successive governments don't get it. When they keep acting as if you can reform education by just tweaking the mixture and standardizing everything and getting back to basics. You know, I wish politicians who talk about getting back to basics understood what they were saying. You know, I think we should get back to basics, but there are some basics which go well beyond what they believe. One is that education is about personal growth. It is. Somebody once said to me the other day, you know, is this book, does this owe some of its ideas to the 1960s? I said, yes. And to the 18th century, and to the 1920s, and to the ancient Greeks, I hope. Some ideas are worth repeating. It is about human flourishing. But it's also about recognizing that education and our communities are part of cultures and they're not independent and insulated from them. So there has to be a cultural commitment. And it's also about economic development, and that has to be synergistic with all of the rest. But at the heart of it, the elemental bit of it, is a different conception of human possibility. And that's really what the book tries to be about as a basis for a different type of conversation. I came across, I'm sure you know this, I came across a great piece a while ago from Michelangelo. It's quite old, this isn't recent, he didn't just say this, you know, it's like this just in, you know, from Michelangelo. But he talked about the making of the statue, the David. And he said, you know, I did not make this sculpture, I didn't make the David, I revealed it. It was there already in the stone. I can't take credit for it, I revealed it. And he said it's an easy thing to do, because all you have to do is to remove the bits that aren't the David. And there it is. That's all you do as a sculptor, remove the bits that aren't the David. And I feel it's a good analogy for us. We should start removing the bits that aren't us, and allow the bits that are us to shine forward. He also said something very interesting. He said the problem for human beings is often not that we aim too high and fail, it's that we aim too low and succeed. And the book is an appeal to aim high and to give us some sense of what success might look like. And I think it comes to that final bit, that finding your passion does change everything. Thank you.
So, where does responsibility, duty, ethics fit into your kind of account of the way in which we lose those things, which we get to the real us, as it were?
Well, they're not, you know, these aren't mutually exclusive ideas. I define, I mean, actually going back to the All Our Futures report of 10 years ago now, but slightly refined, I thought, simplified. The definition I have in the book, actually in the work I do for creativity, is that creativity is the process of having original ideas that have value. And I think the three key things about that are those key words. It's a process, you know, it's not an event. To do something creative is a job of work. You know, it's something that unfolds as you work on the idea and evolve them. It's not just random acts of inspiration, though they may have some part in it. It is about coming up with fresh ideas, but it's also judging the value and worth of them. And, you know, some good ideas, some fresh ideas are not terribly good. And I think what we're seeing, if you're talking about the recent financial collapse, is not so much an act of creativity as a kind of mass hallucination. You know, that this was a whole enterprise that was built on thin air, from what you can tell. And the problem here wasn't that people were being original, it's that they completely lost their critical judgment. You know, they left out entirely the essential counterpart of original thinking, which is evaluating the use of these ideas. And, you know, I mean, I don't have more to say than all of us would say about that, but the problem was not that they were being creative, it's that they weren't being critical. And I think if those two things don't hold together, then you're in, you know, you've created a problem for all of us, and that's simply what's happened. But now, that doesn't mean, therefore, we can't afford to be creative again, but we need to be creative responsibly. You know, we actually do need to remake these systems now, but having learned the lessons that we should have learned from this sort of fiasco of the past few months.
Can we turn to the issue of education? Because you've been around debates about education, you've seen the cycles that policymakers go through over time. We're very likely to have a Conservative government elected next year, and saying some very interesting things. But there is one aspect to its policy which kind of worries me, which is that it is precisely asserting this kind of back to basics view. I heard its very talented spokesman on education say the other day that the diplomas are fine as long as they're just for the people who aren't academic. So there's a very strong push from a party that's likely soon to be in power for a reassertion of the academic vocational divide, a view that practical learning, that creative learning, that approaches like opening minds are some kind of horrible middle-class conspiracy to dumb down. I guess my question to you is what insight do you have, having been round and round these debates, about why it is there's so much circularity to the education debate, why it is we find it so hard to move on, and why, in a way, it's so easy to appeal in a rather kind of reactionary way to public opinion on education?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, these debates go round and round, and it's exasperating. I mean, don't vote for them is one thing I would suggest. But I think it's a serious issue. You know, that this is not. I don't think people are acting in bad faith, truthfully. I don't think they're deliberately trying to run the country off a cliff when they say these things. The problem is much deeper than that. I think of it as ideological. What I mean is, and what all this is about, what I think my work has been about, is trying to challenge the fundamental assumptions on which people make these arguments. You know, when people say get back to basics, it's the thing they don't do. They just default to what they think is common sense, and they think you don't have to reflect on education because they went to school themselves once, and so it's a done deal. You know, everything about education is obvious, and the trouble is, most things that are obvious turn out not to be true. So my feeling about this is that, well, I remember when, do you remember when the national curriculum was introduced? It was, I think, well, I remember Kenneth Baker was the Secretary of State at the time, and essentially he really proposed the curriculum he had when he was at school as a boy. You know, it was really the curriculum of St. Paul's, you know, that the rest of the country was required to follow. Because he defaulted, you know, to the way he used to be educated. And, you know, I always worry when people say, well, it didn't do me any harm. I say, but look at you. Look at the state of you. I mean, why would we... but what I mean is, I think there is an evolution here, but I think you have to have a sensible view of the time frame. These are big cultural shifts that are happening. I think there's a general paradigm shift happening. There's a transformation. Even this conversation, you know, is an important part of that. And you have to have a theory of change. You know, I think one of them is that the changes we're talking about will not only come about if we focus on trying to change the minds of governments. Ministers come and ministers go. They have all their own interests at stake. They want some quick wins. They want to impress the electorate and the Daily Mail. We know that. They're more interested in that on the whole than the health of the country's schools, for the most part, in my opinion. But so we have to work with governments, and we have to get them, I think, to think the right things and do the right things. But it's equally important that we work at the ground level, encourage people who are doing the work, and empower them and help them to believe that it's important that they do these things. You see, the thing I get exasperated about, as I think we all do, is if you're working in education, you're facing 40 kids, you know, in a high-crime area of a city, it doesn't help you to have these pronouncements coming, you know, from Westminster, from ex-public school people, saying, let's get back to basics. You know, it doesn't help. It shows, I think, an appalling misunderstanding of the realities of education. And what's so annoying is they think they're being hard-headed. You know, what if we know anything about education is that people are only transformed if they're engaged. And you can only engage them if you look into their eyes and see how they work and how they think and how they are involved in this work. My daughter, just very quickly, my daughter, for example, loved French until she got this other French teacher at school, this school in Los Angeles. And I went to, at the end of the year, I went along to chat to the teachers, and this French teacher said, you know, we're a bit worried about Kate's progress in French. There are 5 kids in this class, by the way. And I said, why is that? And she said, well, it's her attitude. I said, what do you mean her attitude? She said, well, she seems bored all the time. She seems bored all the time. I said, really? I said, do you have any theories about this? She said, how do you mean? I said, well, could it be boring? You know, just putting it out there, you know. And she said, well, you know, we do try to make it as interesting as possible, but she said, I think you have to accept that some aspects of learning a language are just boring. Well, you see, she shouldn't be teaching if she thinks that, you know, because nothing is inherently boring. I mean, I'm not aware of legions of French teenagers abandoning French because it's so tedious, you know, and moving to Copenhagen so they can speak Danish. I mean, that's... I said, no, you are boring. You know, I mean, I've been with you for 5 minutes and I'm stultified, you know. So, I mean, getting back to basics includes recognizing that great education requires great teaching. It's not enough to know your discipline. A great teacher has to know how to engage people, and great teachers do. And what really I think most people find exasperating is when well-intentioned, if they are, politicians decide they're going to take control of a process they don't know, promote ideas they only half understand, and remove the one thing that improves education, which is the discretion and creativity of the people actually doing the work. And I think it's an historic battle, and I really encourage you to engage with it, because I think it's important that we don't let this drag on for another generation. I really do.
Okay, I'm just going to reinforce that point and then open it up just to say that having been on both sides of this debate, you can see why it is so difficult to get the right kind of conversation. So, for example, the RSA has its Opening Minds curriculum, which is taught in over 200 schools, but it's a framework. It doesn't specify everything that you need to do. And so some schools do it in an incredibly ambitious way and in a really, really good way, and other schools do it in a much more modest way, and some schools don't do it very well at all. Yeah. Which means that those people who don't like Opening Minds can hunt around and find the schools that don't do it very well and say, look, Opening Minds doesn't work. And if you're sitting in Downing Street or a department or a Conservative central office, you think, oh, we can't possibly have that because it doesn't always work. But the point is, in order for it to be something which always worked, it wouldn't work. And I understand that now. I didn't understand it when I was in government. I want to apologise to you and to the world, but
yes,
I do understand it now.
Do you feel better now?
I do. I can't think of anyone better to confess to, Ken, than you. Okay.
But I could say, part of it is, I think, people who do occupy these positions, and they're important positions, is that they seem to confuse, you know, improving education with improving rail track, you know, or improving the drainage system. You know, that if we just standardise everything, it'll hum along sensibly forever. And the fundamental mistake is that education is a human system. It works on relationships and feelings and motivations and aspirations, and every school is different. Every classroom is different because they've got people in there. You know, the whole thing about raising reading scores and so on, it's important. Of course it's important, but it won't happen if kids aren't engaged in reading and being interested. I can't think there's a kid in the country who gets up in the morning thinking, how can I raise my school's reading standards? You know, I mean, what can I do to contribute? You know, they'll only do it if they're engaged, and that's the job of teaching. And so if you have had this moment, Matthew, I'd like us all to be quiet and share it for a moment, because I seriously think it's important. And the RSA has always been about that, I think, about recognising that talent and capability are at the heart of social change. And it's not about standardising, but about raising standards, and that's something different, I think.